We had a list of awards last night. How many people were here for the readings last night? Yeah. Okay. Nnedi Okorafor has won. Binti won both the Hugo and the Nebula. That is not a common occurrence. And then she won the Nomo. But I think of all the many awards she's won, the one that I think for me stands out is in 2008 she won the Wole Soyinka Prize, which is an amazing award to win, and it's particularly amazing for a science fiction or fantasy story as Zara the Windseeker was to win an award like that. If you were to sit down and predict who would not become an international writing star, you might say a Nigerian American writing science fiction and fantasy. You might say that that is not the kind of book that always seizes international attention. I think that gives you an idea of just how good and powerful book after book from Nnedi Okorafor has been. Diane Auerbach, her very first novel won the 2004 Commonwealth Writers' Prize Africa section. It was Gardening at Night. She went on to have a collection of short stories called Cabin Fever, 2011, a novel, Home Remedies, in 2012, and now last year and the sequel next year, two novels called First South and then North, which are science fiction. We will be talking about science fiction, but don't worry, not just science fiction. We'll be talking about a lot of other things. But just to kind of begin the discussion, get us going, I really want you to get a flavor of this writing. So I'm going to ask the two guests to read. Thank you. Who wants to go first? Ah.
Okay, good morning, everyone, again. Question, which would you prefer? Would you prefer that I read from, or that I finish the prologue that I started yesterday from Who Fears Death, or read the beginning of Binti? Okay, that's very clear. Okay, I'll read the beginning of Binti. I powered up the transporter and said a silent prayer. I had no idea what I was going to do if it didn't work. My transporter was cheap, so even a droplet of moisture, or more likely a grain of sand, would cause it to short. It was faulty, and most of the time I had to restart it over and over before it worked. Please not now, I thought. The transporter shivered in the sand and I held my breath. Tiny, flat, and black as a prayer stone, it buzzed softly and then slowly rose from the sand. Finally, it produced the baggage-lifting force. I grinned. Now I could make it to the shuttle. I swiped Ojitse from my forehead with my index finger and knelt down. Then I touched the finger to the sand, grounding the sweet-smelling red clay into it. Thank you, I whispered. It was a half-mile walk along the dark desert road. With the transporter working, I would make it there on time. Straightening up, I paused and shut my eyes. Now the weight of my entire life was pressing on my shoulders. I was defying the most traditional part of myself for the first time in my life. I was leaving in the dead of night, and they had no clue. My 9 siblings, all older than me except for my younger sister and brother, would never see this coming. My parents would never imagine I'd do such a thing in a million years. By the time they all realized what I'd done and where I was going, I'd have left the planet. In my absence, my parents would growl to each other that I was never to set foot in their home again. My 4 aunties and 2 uncles who lived down the road would shout and gossip amongst themselves about how I'd scandalized our entire bloodline. I was going to be a pariah. "Go," I softly whispered to the transporter, stamping my foot again. The thin metal rings I wore around each ankle jingled noisily, but I stamped my foot again. Once on, the transporter worked best when I didn't touch it. "Go," I said again, sweat forming on my brow. When nothing moved, I chanced giving the 2 large suitcases sitting atop the force field a shove. They moved smoothly, and I breathed another sigh of relief. At least some luck was on my side. Thank you.
La cámara es suya. Hello, everyone. I have many writing names. This one is Frank Owen. I have a co-writer, Alex Latimer, and this is our first collaboration. The 2 characters are Vida and Dice, and they're in an alternative America where there are many, many viruses, and they're on the run. America is also divided into the north and the south. At this stage in the book, they've come to a town that is mysteriously healthy. Nobody there is suffering from the many viruses that are wind-borne, and they want to know why. And they're being taken on a tour under the town. The town is called The Mouth, which is a translation of an Afrikaans name in South Africa, Die Mond. You also need to know that one of the side effects of Dice's virus is that he can see in the dark. His day vision is terrible, but he has night vision. The mines were darker than Vida had expected. The glow from Ed's flame seemed to extend only so far, a bauble of light that struggled against the black. It made her wonder whether there were degrees of dark. A candle flame could brighten the whole kitchen back at the old house. The light from it seemed to enliven the space. Halo the people sitting at the table, go in search of the undead corners and cracks. This darkness was different, thick and unfriendly, a plague blanket. They descended as they went, and they expected the air to grow colder and less hospitable. Instead, it was warmer and more humid. Then the air pockets merged and the temperature evened out. It was constant for the last few feet, uterine. They came to a junction. Ed turned left, and they saw the yellow-green glow that crept towards them like a nightlight under the door. He led them into the chamber itself, lit by a couple of lanterns overhead. In the soft glow, the air seemed to move and shimmer, and it shouldn't have. Not this far under the earth, where no air currents stirred, except those thrown up by the movement of their bodies. But the motes were there, suspended. They twirled, balletic, in the haloed light. Vida covered her mouth in the old instinct, and when Dice saw her, he did the same. The rest of the workers were muffled by the cloths they wore like masks. Whatever it was, it didn't bother Ed. He just stood there and gestured at the floor and the wooden boxes there, made from pallets. They were filled to the rim with black mulch, like portable graves. From them grew millions of mushrooms, luminous against the space-dark earth, an underground forest. Each box held a different kind Vida could see. Big brownish ones with fronds, red spotted ones that looked poisonous, small white ones, bright as buttons. Others looked like failed experiments, shrunken into warts or cups or human livers, frilled or gilled or phosphorescent. They sprouted in groups or singly, proud and offish. And they weren't just horizontal. Some were being trained to grow up the poles that reached the cavern's roof, where the lanterns dangled, and tending them all were the linen-wrapped women of the mouth, their thin fingers busy weeding in the mulch. Ed stopped. You got to be real careful around some of these ones, he said softly, like the oysters. He stooped to tweezer out a mushroom the size of his hand, making sure he didn't bruise its brothers. He held it up to the light of his burner. Here is the real secret of the mouth.
Okay. Thank you for the wonderful readings. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about, or comment on what we've heard in the reading. I mean, Nettie, your story, it's in the future. There's a transporter. There's that wonderful line when you suddenly drop that she's going to go into space. And yet at the same time, she's treating her skin with red clay. She's got ankle bracelets. This is very plainly a future which is heavily inflected with African culture. In this case, I think possibly kind of Somalian, a bit.
It's the future. So Binti takes place in the distant future. So at this time, borders have shifted, cultures have blended, and I like to think that it's harder to know exactly where Binti takes place. I know that, like, okay, she's the main character is Himba, you know, and so that's Namibia. But also, so you've got two groups of people that figure prominently in this story, and they are Black, African, and Arab. So we've got Namibia, but we've got, like, the borders have moved and everyone has moved around. So really, I just like, that's why I say, when I describe the main character of Binti, I just say an African girl, because it's just too much to explain.
The future will be different.
Yes.
Yeah. It's one of the things I think I see a lot of, for want of a better word, and we might talk about terms, speculative fiction doing in this context, is looking at traditional cultures, traditional beliefs, and either moving them into the contemporary setting, or in the case of Who Fears Death and Binti, showing the validity of pre-colonial sciences and technologies and moving them into that future and not marginalizing them and making them central, is one of the things that the fiction is now doing in Africa. Is it using this genre, for want of a better word, to reach back into the past and incorporate it in the modern in some way? And either one?
You know, I don't know. I don't know if I can't speak for all African writers. I know what I hope to see. I know what I hope to see. I don't want to make any generalizations. I know what I try to do is bring things forward. And I know it's something that I did in both Who Fears Death and in Binti, where I'm, especially in the beginning, because beginnings of stories are very, very important to me. I think they set the pace. And both in Binti and in Who Fears Death, you have that moment where, okay, you see a part of Africa that is familiar, and then very subtly, you know, and organically, you see technology, and you understand that this is somewhere, that this is at some time in the future, and it's natural, and that's really important for me to show. I don't want to speak for other writers.
I think that is also a changed culture. That's an America in which the whole history of America has changed and is different. Somebody's built a wall between North and South. Can you just talk about some of the things you were trying to achieve with this alternative history and this apocalyptic story? It's set in a rather negative future where some of the changes are not so good. Or in fact, given the different history, your heroine is not only black, but her mother is an African in America, and yet we don't find that out until halfway through the novel, really. That's not even an issue. Is there anything in all of that that you'd like to address?
I do just want to say that we were writing this 3 to 4 years ago. It was before Donald Trump tried to build a wall across America. I think all novels generally are novels about conflict and division. And I think writers generally try to investigate how those divisions can be overcome. I'm very interested in those kind of integration processes, both between groups of people and within individual characters, which is what we were doing eventually in South, but wasn't the first thing that we set out to do. As a South African writer, we write about apartheid a lot, but there's only so much preaching from the soapbox that you can do before people start checking their phones and looking bored. We know all the things. The question is, what do we do now? And speculative fiction is looking at that sort of thing. The bad thing has already happened. What happens next? I'm also, in retrospect, looking at this book after a couple of years, is seeing a theme emerging of health. What does it mean to be healthy? Physically, mentally, spiritually. And I think especially for South Africans of all stripes, we're incredibly unhealthy in ourselves, just the way we think about almost everything that's happening in our country. And writers have the privilege of trying to deal with that, I think. Yeah.
So setting it in America in a way provided a little bit of aesthetic distance so you could get at it in different ways?
Trojan horse.
Aha, okay. I mean, it's an awkward question. I'm going to ask 2 awkward questions in a row. I've interviewed about 100 African science fiction writers, and I would say about 75 of them are male. And yet, if you look at the field as a whole, there's Nnedi Okorafor, there's Sophia Samatar, there's Lauren Bucas, there's Helen Oyeyemi, there's Irene Osunokoji. Does it seem to you that maybe underrepresented numerically, but women in the field are kind of punching above their weight?
Quality over quantity.
Yeah, quality over quantity. But it is very noticeable that on the ground, the writers tend to be male, and yet so much of the success, I mean, when we touched on starting the ASFS, the names we most wanted to have sort of endorsing it with the big names, and the big names often were the female writers.
But one thing I noticed about all the names that you listed, they're all in the diaspora.
Yes.
You know, there's, that's something to look at. Mm-hmm. If we're talking about the success of female speculative fiction writers, or African speculative fiction writers, why are the ones who are the most successful the ones who are in the diaspora? I think that's a question we should ask. I have my theories on it, but no.
Doing my best.
I'm not going. I have my theories on it.
My theory is that
saying things. I don't want to.
No, okay. I'm not twisting your arm here. No, my theory is slightly on the diaspora front. Is that science fiction and fantasy have always been linked to diaspora. The last time science fiction up sticks and moved from Europe to America, it was associated with 2 great diasporas, and I think diasporas confront anyone with a loss of a past and a possible new future, and both encourage thinking about cultures that may have gone and cultures that may come.
But it's almost like looking at colonialism versus slavery.
Yeah.
To me, they're 2 sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
So, therefore, I would expect speculative fiction to come out of Africa as well. Mm-hmm. As not just, I would expect there to be that urge to imagine and look forward and consider. I would expect that urge to be just as much in the continent as it is in the diaspora. But
I think it is. I'm not sure that you need to leave Africa to be in diaspora, as everything is changing so quickly. The immense sense of cultural change and technological change. So maybe there's some of the stuff that's in diaspora is happening here without having to move. Is now the time to mention the AF-ism word?
Yes.
Okay.
What's your question?
There's a debate.
It has a question.
Some of you may be rather bored with the debate about the term Afrofuturism, but maybe we could begin to unpack some of that debate.
You know what? First, I'd like you to define it, because your definition is the your definition is the.
Hey, I asked the questions here. Oi. Okay. In origin, it was looking at, I think, a phenomenon that was focused on the Americas. Some of its theoretical basis was in the alienation of the body coming out of slavery. And the term Afrofuturism was born, and it was all about looking at the future. And it was a very useful term indeed, partly because it didn't confine itself to to literature or any one medium of art. It looked at music, it looked at painting. The Last Angel of History was a very influential film that came out in the early 90s about Afrofuturism, but was somewhat noticeable is that it didn't mention a single African. So I think the term has been expanded and debated, and it's a useful term, but I kind of find it a bit problematic, partly because so much of speculative fiction is actually not looking at the future. It is, so many of the young writers you talk to, they're talking about saving, preserving, speculating about bringing into the now traditional beliefs, traditional cultures. And so futurism may be a bit of a misnomer, but I also kind of feel that it's not my space in a way. So thanks for putting me on the spot.
No problem.
Yeah, anytime, Nettie. But perhaps now.
Okay. Yeah, very, very good definition. And I wanted you to define it because the way that I define it is different, and it's kind of moved. I don't believe that definitions are stagnant and that they should never change. And I think that the definition of what Afrofuturism is has changed. And just to preface this with, I had a conversation about this, or I brought this up on Twitter, and it caused a lot of anger. Especially in the African American community. I'm not really interested in categories. I don't like spending time trying to define things. I like spending time actually writing things that then other people try to categorize. I don't really enjoy spending my time trying to pin something down, because usually when you try to pin something down, then something else comes along and changes the definition, and I feel like it's an exercise in futility. But when it comes to Afrofuturism, I am labeled with that word so often, whether I like it or not, that it's become an issue to me. And if I'm going to be labeled with something, I like to know exactly what it is. And I'd like to have a little control over that definition as well. So that's why it's become important to me. I also think that the definition of Afrofuturism sits on a fault line, a cultural fault line of the black diaspora and Africans on the continent, a greater issue than just the definition of Afrofuturism. Thirdly, I think that the word Afrofuturism is about to become very mainstream when the Black Panther movie comes out. And so I think that before it comes out, I think it's a good idea to have this conversation and have a clear idea of what is Afrofuturism, where does it lie. So my general thing is that, and I know of the history of it, I have a PhD in literature, so I know what Afrofuturism is. I know that it is something that really grew out. I know a white man named it. I know a white man came up with the word. I also know that it is that it was mainly created in the United States. So I know that. I know the history of it. At the same time, as I said, I think that the word can evolve, and I think it has. I think these days it's become synonymous to African science fiction. Like when people, especially in the West, want a good, clear idea of what is, when they want to mention African science fiction, they say Afrofuturism. That's what it's become, in my opinion. What was the last thing that I wanted to say? Oh yeah, and so for my own definition of Afrofuturism, and I understand that this is a sensitive thing to say, and if anyone tweets this, it will probably start another argument, and that's fine. I'm getting used to that. But I think that as the definition evolves, because I do believe in evolution, I think that the center of Afrofuturism should be moved back to where it began, which I say is the continent. So that's my controversial thing, and I'm going to stop talking now.
Thanks. Okay. One of the things that's very noticeable, every single short story on the NOMO short story shortlist was already published online for free. We didn't have to try and make it available to the membership, which kind of indicates that there's been a whole range of alternative platforms, and I think that that's quite important for fiction in Africa, is how you get it to, it's everywhere, how you get it to people. So Dan, you've done some looking at alternative platforms and literature distribution.
Yeah, obviously there are lots of different ways to do it. I was involved in Funza, which is a mobile platform where you write it's a kind of suspense, drip feed suspense gig where you write a chapter a day and people download it on their phones, and then there's a comment section. And it's been, so you get an instant sense of your audience's reaction. And it's been a very interesting process. It's free and there's a website, and if you're interested in going to have a look at some of the stories, you can. It's F-U-N-D-Z-A, Funza. So that's one. There's another project for little children called Book Dash, which is African stories by African writers, illustrators, editors, designers. You do all your planning beforehand, and then on one day you have 12 hours to put your book together. It's very exciting. And the idea is that the only way to really address the literary and literacy crisis in South Africa especially is for really young kids to be readers. By the time you reach university and you're protesting about fees must fall, it's too late. That window has closed. So the idea is that every child under 5 owns 100 of their own storybooks. It's a very ambitious project, and when it is successful, it's very successful. I'm very happy to be part of it. I'm writing a book about death. What else? Collaborative writing in general, I think, is a fantastic thing. The trick is to find somebody who's on the same wavelength as you, and for you to have slightly different skill sets. There are different ways of doing it. The way that Alex and I do it is we talk about it a lot, obviously. We plot it out, often with little cartoons, because he's an illustrator. And then he does a draft, and then I double that. And it does make you very lazy, though, because it's so much easier than writing by yourself. But also just fascinating to see how the story changes as soon as it goes through the vector of somebody else. And it's something that's happening more and more frequently, like writing for TV, all those amazing series that are on there, those are team efforts. Yeah, I don't know if it's harder to be a writer now, an individual writer, but there's so many more options.
Especially on all these interactive media, you almost have to write in a team.
you really, there's so much material to be generated. There's, you know, so many alternatives, so you just have to have a bunch of people working on it. Okay. So South Africa. I really just do want to say, Who Fears Death does something that I've been yearning to see somebody do, which is to take the traditional values and cultural flavors and move them into a future. And it's a wonderful book. The book Lagoon, however, is also one of the most amazing books. It kind of puts a bomb under almost all of your reading expectations. It's set in a contemporary Lagos, the aliens land. It's sort of a satire. The reaction to the aliens involves fraudulent pastors and 419ers and taxi drivers. It's a complete sort of social portrait of Lagos and tribute to Lagos. The first point of view of character is an intelligent swordfish that's targeting the oil pipelines. And halfway through, by halfway through, there is already kind of an apocalyptic social change, upheavals, and it's so spectacular. I think almost any other writer would have said, I've done it. Wow, I can stop here. And the book just keeps on pushing and getting more and more spectacular. And crazier, the hungry road comes to life and starts eating people. On and on. It's just fantastic. And yet it never feels surrealistic. And I think one of the things I was always hoping that we would get in African science fiction is a different and fresher view of Africa as it is. And I think that book does that. Was that one of the aims?
I guess. It's Lagoon was different from any novel that I've written. It was first the idea of Nigerians dealing with aliens. That was inspired by my dislike of the film District 9. So there was that. If you don't know District 9 is about aliens coming or getting stranded over the city of Johannesburg, South Africa, and then they become refugees. And in this film, Nigerians in particular were treated horribly. They were portrayed horribly. They were portrayed as prostitutes, cannibals, criminals. The head gangster, there was like a group of the Nigerians, was named after Nigerian president. It just had all sorts of problems, and it really angered me when I saw it because I had such high hopes for it. And so that was how it began. And then, so I started thinking about aliens, and I'm thinking, okay, how would Nigerians react to aliens? And then, of course, the first place, because, you know, when writers want to place their stories in a place of conflict, you want conflict. You want things happening. You want it to be exciting. So the first place that popped into my head was Lagos. It had to be in Lagos. And then there were two other novels that really kind of that had a huge impact on me, and I wanted to write something that took from their spirits. The first one was Under the Dome by Stephen King. Under the Dome was written in many, many, many different points of views. And one thing that when I'm reading as a reader that I just get very irritated with is when there are many points of views in a story, and because more often than not, there's one or two characters that I really like, and then whenever it jumps to those characters, it's, you know, I just want to put the book down because or jumps away from those characters. I want to put the book down because, you know, I'm more interested in those characters. So in Under the Dome, Stephen King managed to hold my attention with every single one of those characters. And I'm like, when I read it, I was like, oh, I want to try to do that. You know, that's really tough. I want to try to do that. And so that was one thing. And then Ngugi wa Thiong'o's book, Wizard of the Crow, that is one of my favorite novels ever, and it's political satire, and it's also, I guess you would consider it magical realism, and that had a really great impact. So at some point, I started kind of spawning this novel, and it was just taking from a lot of different areas. I wanted to look at the city of Lagos. I've been coming there since I was little, and I've had, there was one trip that I had when I was around 16 years old that was just within the first 15 minutes of landing and getting to the hotel was absolutely terrifying for a plethora of reasons, and I told myself I was never coming back. And it took me like 10 years to come back, and when I did, you know, I always come back, that's the thing. I always come back, and so 10 years later, came back, and that was when I was able to just kind of take in this energy, and from the city, and at that point I knew I wanted to write about Lagos as well. So when I sat down to write about it, there were all these, I knew I couldn't show Lagos from one point of view. I knew I had to show it from many. If aliens were to come to Lagos, the people of Lagos would come to meet the aliens, the people. And so that's not just human beings. And I knew that. That's not just human beings, because I feel like the city of Lagos has more than human beings dwelling in it. So I knew that they had to come and meet. So that was where, so you've got not just the people meeting the aliens who come out of the water, but the animals. You've got a swordfish, a bat, a tarantula, and then you've got the spirits, the ancestors, the plants. Everyone comes to meet them. So yeah, that's really how that book came about. And it was like, it wasn't that I was thinking about, okay, this is what I wanted to do. It was just, it was the way the story needed to be told. There was only one way for that story to be told, which was in many, many points of view, in many chapters, small and long, and just a chaos of story.
And a bit that sounded a little bit like a Nollywood film.
Yes. Oh, and that too. Yeah. There's just so much to that book.
Yeah. It really, if you can get a hold of a copy, it's an amazing book. One of the things I really like about being in this space is that there's much less of a division of genre. That you won the Wally Soyinka Prize in 2008 and nobody batted an eyelid that it was science fiction. That's not the case in many parts of the world where science fiction is regarded as a genre that you define yourself as, you know, I am a science fiction writer, and in fact I'm a science fiction writer of space opera, and I don't get out of that space. One of the things I see a lot of African writers doing is writing a literary novel, writing a crime novel, writing another literary novel, doing a science fiction novel. I mean, a lot of your writing would be, to give it a label, would be literary. So moving into science fiction, not just with South, but Leatherman in Terra Incognita, you move in and across genres. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Well, they say you write the things that you want to read.
Yes.
And still my absolute favorite thing to read on earth is those compendiums of horror stories. They are the best. You just get this variety, all these different writers, all these different topics, and they are, I don't know, there's a kind of snobbishness about it, still attached to it, that somehow genre writing is less difficult or less admirable, and the truth is that genre writing is the hard one. You have to know what you're doing. Literary fiction, you can just waffle on, and your editors, yeah, yes, this is definitely part of your culture. We'll just let this go, even though there's no plot and also no ending.
No plot.
They're kind of afraid to touch it. Whereas genre, it's rigorous. I like that. It's challenging. But I'm not committed to any one thing. I want to do one of everything. I'm writing poetry at the moment. And my name is Diane, and I write poetry. There, I'm out. Yeah, I think those are, I mean, they're marketing tools, and maybe they don't need to happen, but there it is.
Yay.
I add a little bit to that. yeah, they're marketing tools, but they're also, they can be used, this idea of categorization and labeling can be harmful to writers, and where I came across it being most harmful was within academia. I have 2 masters and a PhD, so that's 8 years, maybe a little bit more than that, but about over 8 years of being in higher post-grad education. And from the very beginning, because I'm a product of creative writing classes. I started writing in college as an undergrad, and the first place where I started writing was in a creative writing workshop, a short story workshop. I had never written a story before that, never. And so from the very first creative writing workshop, and I had many after that, I had professors who I deeply respected, who I learned the craft of writing from, telling me that science fiction and fantasy were not real literature. They were telling me not to stop writing it. They were telling me, oh, you're such a great writer, you need to stop writing this weird stuff, you know? And professor after professor. So, like, for me, I'm just hard-headed. I will write what I'm going to write. That's just what comes. I cannot control it. From the very first story that I wrote had magical elements in it before I even knew the label of fantasy. And so that's just what I write. And so despite the fact that from bachelor's to PhD, where even in my PhD we had novel writing workshops where the professors would come in and they'd say on the first day of class, no one in this class is to write science fiction or fantasy. And that happened, and the professor who said that, she ended up being my advisor, my PhD advisor. And this is a bit of advice that I always give to students, that like if you have this happen to you, just slap the label of magical realism on it and you'll be okay. I say that as often as possible. You'll be okay. That's acceptable. Just make sure what you write is really good. You'll be fine. But like I write what I write, and I'm very, very hard-headed, and it's just, I can't not write what I write, so that saved me. But I think about more impressionable writers who come into these programs and are told that, and then they start suppressing that urge, you know, suppressing what they're writing. And what happens if you suppress what you want to write and you start trying to write something that fits a norm or fits what's acceptable, what ends up happening is eventually you'll stop writing because you're not going to want to write that. It's not going to be enjoyable. It's going to be it's going to be dreadful eventually. And I think a lot of creative minds have been kind of silenced in that way due to labels. So that's where my dislike of labels started in academia, because I realized early, I'm like, I want to write this, and I know this is good, and I don't really see what's wrong with science fiction or fantasy. I understand, I can write literary fiction, I can write that if I wanted to. I don't find it difficult at all. It's just not what I want to write, and I don't understand why I'm being told I can't write what I want to write. I don't understand how there's a right and a wrong. I thought a good story is a good story. So, sorry for the rant. I'm so mad.
Or to translate, Mr. Okorafor, could you please stop being you? I think it's now, sorry, we've hogged, I've hogged these incredible writers. So, questions from the floor, please. So just shoot up a hand, a mic will get to you. Every question gets a free book. No, that's wrong.
Hi, my name is Auli. I have a question directed at you. I'm sorry, I don't know your... Diane, forgive me. It's based on what you said earlier. I mean, all these platforms that tools, if I'd say, online that help writers write, like BookDash and the rest of them. Maybe I'm a bit old and I'm a bit traditional, but you know, in my head, it's just sort of like one way to go about writing a book. What do you think about the way? I mean, do you think there's sort of like sort of like an evolution going on about in the ways that we produce work, do you think that there's some sort of evolution that we should be looking at or something, and rather than being bogged down and keep thinking that it will only be one way, and that's by sitting down one place, writing the book, looking for an agent, sending it to a publisher, and then getting feedback from critics? So what do you think? What's your take?
Look, publishing is an industry, so you're dealing with the establishment, with a capital E, with all the gatekeeping stuff that goes along with it. Point number one. Point number two, a whole lot of it is luck and timing. There are a lot of books that are competent but not amazing, and they just got really, really lucky. And by the same token, there's some amazing books out there that just aren't ever going to see the light of day. So publishing generally is problematic. So there are ways and ways. You can go the traditional route. The thing is, I think, and I've only managed to do it once, is to see what the next wave is and to get in early. Because by the time it's cresting, it's too late. Write the thing you need to write, because there are different reasons for writing as well. Commercial success is one of them, and that's lovely, but making a career out of your hobby brings its own set of problems. And writing for yourself is obviously the thing that's most important, I think. I don't know if that answers your question. No.
What I hear you say is, just do what you feel is true to yourself.
Also,
whether or not.
What you write is a message.
Yes.
You are sending it to somebody.
Yes.
And they do something with it once they receive it.
Yes. Regardless of the platform.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
If I can just jump in, one of the things I'm doing is helping writers who want to sell in the West in the big magazines. I'm editing the stories, I'm polishing them up, I'm sending them to the West, because then the writers can get some money they'll get $300 for selling a short story. All well and good, and if people want to do that, I love it, but all the time, I'm very worried that that's A, undercutting the African magazines here, and B, it's not helping to build the audience here. You want to have writing by Africans for Africans that can get an audience in Africa. And I think the alternative platforms, I don't think we'd have, Wally Talabi's counted 762 science fiction stories by Africans published in the last 2 years. I don't think that could have happened without these new platforms. They're there, and what's more, you don't even have to have a tablet, you just have to have a smartphone, and you can get hold of the fiction and read. And I'm sorry, book distribution is getting bad everywhere. It's getting very difficult. Sorry, next question. Gentleman with his hand up, white sleeve.
My name is Dada Olanipeko. I'm into journalism, creative writing, and film production. I want to find out the issue of adaptation, especially in some of your works. Have you made efforts that your works should be adapted into film production? That is the first question. The second question has to do with the issue of mentoring. I want to find out how many have you mentored so far. Then the issue of residency. How far have you been able to encourage young writers when it comes to having residency in outside the country, especially young African writers? Thank you.
I'll speak on the film. I'll speak on the mentor issue. I've said this before. I have complex feelings about mentoring. Is it good? It's all right. It's technology. It's sturdy. So I have. If we're talking about writers who are writing, I have complex feelings about this idea of mentoring new writers. And they might be controversial, what I'm about to say. It might sound callous. I don't believe in mentoring writers. I think that new writers need to Wow, okay. That's encouraging. I thought I was about to get booed. I think that new writers need to take that time and write and focus on that. I think that new writers need to find their way themselves, because having your hand held by somebody who is established and then having this established writer show you the way, and I'm speaking from experience because I didn't have any mentors. I mean, I had like a writer who I would meet at a book signing who would give me great advice. Like I met the author of The Golden Compass, his Dark Materials series, Philip Pullman, twice, and he gave me very good advice about being a professor and a writer and how to keep the two separate. He gave me very good advice. But I didn't have a mentor who showed me how to do everything that I needed to do. I had to find my way. And the thing is, that is a harder path. It is much easier to have somebody who has done it all and knows everything that needs to be done and can show you where you need to go. That is much easier. It might be even a path to faster success, but it's not going to grow you as a writer. You're not going to learn those things on your own. You're not going to make those mistakes. You're not going to discover those things that even your mentor wouldn't even know. You know? So I think that writers need to find their own way, because that helps also develop the writing as well. It helps to develop the voice. For me, because I didn't have someone showing me where I needed to go, I was able to kind of develop these things, develop this voice, this unique voice that I have. And if I had a mentor, that mentor might have told me, might have tried to fashion me in a way that was acceptable to the mentor. You know, I couldn't do my thing, and what I do is very personal and very specific to who I am. So if I had somebody showing me, it wouldn't have been the same. So also writers, you have to develop a strength. You have to develop a strength to do this thing, and that strength is only developed when you're out there doing that thing. You can't have someone else kind of showing you everything that you need to do. So I'll shut up about that. Okay, and do you have anything?
I have something to add. Most writers don't make a living as writers. We have day jobs. So if I'm going to be mentoring a whole bunch of people, I want to be paid for that. Because it's 25 years of education and experience and wah, 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 wah. No one goes to doctors and plumbers, will you do this for free all the time, please? But creatives, people feel okay to ask for freebies. That said, I am a writing teacher, and I do some mentoring.
Yeah. Yes. And there's a difference. Writers, I mean, I give advice all the time. Like, I will give advice about, like, if writers come up to me and ask me questions, I will talk till my face turns blue. That's different from a mentorship. As far as film, did you want to answer the film question before I... Okay. I do have one, you know, Who Fears Death was optioned by HBO, and so that's in this. And there's some other things going on, I'll just say that. Some other things going on. But yeah, so I'm kind of learning about that process. Also, my short story, Hello Moto, which is published by Tor.com, is also being adapted into a short film by CJ Abasi in Fiery Films here in Nigeria. Is CJ here? Oh, I don't see him. Wait, stand up, stand up.
I think we only have time for maybe one or two more questions, so could the questions be questions very, to the point and direct? Blue, hand up over there.
I wanted to ask about female writing in science fiction, because that's what I call it. It's fantasy and science fiction. I think Geoff asked that question from you, Nedi, earlier. I think you kind of like. And I remember you saying the less, the better, or something like that, the better the quality of people. And yeah, I know what you did there. I just want to find out, And you, to you, Geoff, I mean, I know you've been collating African writers, and there are so few women. Why do you think this is, as in women from Africa writing science fiction and fantasy about Africa? I want you to address the issue and not like kind of, thank you.
Ouch. Very briefly, to strike a positive note, there is, I can never pronounce your name, that's Ayodele Olafinatude. And Ayodele is, hello, my name is Ayodele, and I am a practicing science fiction writer. I confess it proudly. In Uganda, they have a wonderful organization called FemRite. It's been going for 20 years. Gorechi Kiyomondo was, I thought, going to be here, and I really wanted to say hi to her again. They've had amazing impact in Uganda. So Uganda is a kind of hotbed of writers like Lilian Aujo, Innocent Immaculate Achan, Francis Mwonge. There's lots of young writers come up. Malawi is a hotbed of science fiction. And Tseki Chilima and Ikari Muvundala. Please God, I got that right. So there are a lot of women on the continent writing. As to why there's a gender imbalance, that's a huge issue, and I have no idea.
And it's not just an African one either.
No way.
Yeah, that's a general issue with science fiction as a whole. Yeah.
I think we have time for one other question. Very quickly. You get a virtual non-existent free book. It will be non-signed by Nydia Okorafor. Up there in the corner, orange shirt.
Okay, my question is this. I noticed earlier on that while we were hearing a lot about, especially Nedi's books, most of us did not have the opportunity down here to be able to purchase these books because they were barely available for us to buy. So I want to being done towards distribution of these books, especially in Africa to Africans, because we see lots of movies about science fiction and stuff like that, and it means a lot for us to be able to read about our own people in these spaces. But we can only hear about them online, but we don't really have that opportunity to be able to buy them. So that's the first question. And then second, quickly, how is this being adapted into the academia? Because okay, I studied English and literature in the university, and these are new and emerging genres of literature that we almost never get to hear anything about in school. So if anything like this, even for those of us who had opportunities to do a bit of creative writing in school, we don't even, I don't know, this never comes up. Okay, so what is being done to bring this out and put it into our academia?
All over the world. Your question is more geared towards the publishers. How are they getting there? How are they distributing the books? As far as academia goes, I think that things have changed. Things are in the process of changing. I think that the way that science fiction and fantasy and speculative fiction as a whole, and new professors are coming in who don't have that snobbery and have a broader view. That's what it is. It's snobbery.
Just retired.
Yeah. Who don't have that very narrow view. So I think that in time you're going to see more, you're going to see actual courses in science fiction. And I mean, I teach science fiction. I teach a science fiction class. Candidates who are studying science fiction. So like these things are happening where you get the dissertations that are being written. It's a slow process. It's not instant, and it has to happen on the ground level. You get the dissertations, you get the study, you get the validation, and then you get the professors moving in who have different attitudes. It's a gradual thing, and I think it's happening.
Just a quick plug, that course. So people can just go there, use those texts, use it as a basis of a course. Manchester Review, special issue 18. I think we've got to finish off. That, yes.
Geoff, we'd like to
We were 3 women, 3 friends. We had goals, hopes and dreams. Then I made these wigs. Don't ever mix juju with technology. There is a witchcraft to science and a science to witchcraft. Both will conspire against you eventually.